wiser sister of the Lim clan. So I'm really happy to be here with you guys. I'm going to talk a little bit about mental health and specifically about rest and all the things that are coming up for us during this pandemic. So let's just start with a word of prayer. Father in heaven, thank you so much for your goodness towards us and your grace, for the Sabbath that gives us rest. I pray that as we open your word, that you would speak to us and help us to see you more clearly. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So I believe we have a poll question that I think is on Slido, right?
Yeah, okay. So I just put it in the chat. So if you go to the link and then you enter in ACF NAD in the hashtag space, you should see the poll. Let me make it live. Okay, so it's live, so you should be able to vote.
So if you can answer the question there, it says to open it up. So there's a poll question and it says, how have your energy levels been during this pandemic? And there's 4 options. So we're taking an average where, energy levels, they shift from day to day, week to week, moment by moment. But on average, from the start of the pandemic, how have your energy levels been? So just choose one and send it off. And I would really like to see the answers. We will do that in a bit. How do you see the results, Victoria?
Sorry?
After you submit your answer, you can see the results.
Okay. Okay. Cool. So as you do that, we're just gonna take that, fold it up, put it in our pocket for later. We're gonna come back to it afterwards. But I want to start off with a Bible verse, and that is John chapter 3, verses 1 to 4. So John chapter 3, verses 1 to 4. I'm going to read it for us. And this verse is something I always come back to that tells us about human nature, okay? It says, there was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. This man came to Jesus by night and said to him, Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher come from God, for no one can do these signs that you do unless God is with him. Jesus answered and said to him, most assuredly I say to you, unless one is born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. Nicodemus said to him, how can a man be born when he is old? Can he enter a second time into his mother's womb and be reborn? So what do you notice here that's happening? Nicodemus comes to Jesus and he says, I want to hear from you. And Jesus literally says to him, well, you have to be born again. And Nicodemus is really puzzled by this because he says, well, how can I go back to my mother's womb? That's impossible. And if you think about it, that's true. That is impossible. How would you do that? But I think what's very telling in this verse is our propensity as human beings to focus on the physical. Jesus wasn't talking about physically returning into his mother's womb. In the next verse, we'll read that it's about a spiritual rebirth, right? Being born of water and of spirit. So I think this is really applicable to us as human beings because it's so much easier for us to dwell on the physical, what we can see, what we can touch, than it is for something that is less tangible. I heard a story this week that I thought was really fitting. There's this analogy of a man who is searching under a streetlight during the night. He's searching for his keys under the streetlight. And a passerby sees him and says, oh, hey, what are you doing? He says, oh, I'm looking for my keys. Well, let me help you. And together they start looking for his keys under the street lamp. And after a while, the passerby says, I really can't see your keys anywhere here. Are you sure you dropped them here? And the guy goes, no, I actually dropped them back in the bush, but the light is shining here. That's why I'm looking here. So it's kind of like this silly story about how we tend to go on the path of least resistance, right? Like it's easier for us to focus on the physical body or on the physical things than it is for us to understand things that are a little bit more nuanced. And I think that's the case when it comes to mental health. So it's easier for us to think about medicine and like disease in the body as in like actual like physical diseases that, you know, we can measure, that we can tell in very, very concrete ways that we're sick. But when it comes to mental health, it tends to be a lot more like, oh, no, we don't really like, we're not really sure about that because it's much more nuanced. But I want us to keep this in mind. This is this principle of we always try to look at the physical first just because it's easier. But then because we do that, we miss a whole bunch of layers of depth when we do that. So those two things in mind. Now let's look back at the poll that we did. So it looks like 23 people have answered. So how have your energy levels been during this pandemic? And it looks like 50%, so about 50% have said I have less energy than usual. 29% said I have the same amount of energy. 17% said I have very little energy and feel unmotivated. And 4% said I have more energy than usual. So it's kind of like across the board. But what I find is that's interesting about this time period that we're in right now is that this is something so fascinating for people who like to understand human beings to study because we are all going through a pandemic at the same time, right? It's a worldwide thing, but we all have very different circumstances and very different ways in which we experience this time. So in my work, I've been noticing that a lot of people have been feeling less energy than usual, which kind of seems to be supported by this poll a little across. Yeah, it maybe varies a little bit here and there, but it seems that people have a little bit less energy than usual, which if you think about it, why would that be? Most people are staying home. They're not driving as much. They are not going out as much. They're not doing as much. They're much more sedentary. So why do you think that people's energy levels are just lower during this time? What are your guys' thoughts?
I think for me personally, it's a lot of like more work from home kind of situation. Like my physical going to work has decreased significantly, and that like it's just I don't know. I'm just like always at home. It's just I know you're right. We don't drive as much. We're not physically doing as much, but like just being at home constantly kind of makes me like yeah, maybe I'm just like used to it now, and like the energy kind of like is gone. I don't know how to explain it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thanks, Geets. What about the rest of you guys? Why do you think energy levels are lower right now?
I think it's because we are not doing exercise as usual, and the brain and the oxygen is not the same that pass to the brain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we're not actually moving our bodies. Okay. Any other thoughts?
I think also, well, like how, like, for example, getting like some sunshine. I mean, depending on where people are located in their homes, like I live in my basement for the most part, so I don't usually get sunshine. And like I almost feel unmotivated to go outside because I'm scared I'm gonna get pulled over or like get a fine or something. So it's like, oh, I don't want to get it, or whatever. But I still go outside anyway. But that could be another reason. It's just the fear of going outside and getting sunshine as well.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. Any other thoughts? Why are we more tired than usual or have less energy?
Maybe it's also a personality thing. Like
for extroverts, if they're not seeing people, like a Zoom hangout is not the same as seeing them in person. So if they're not being like stimulated by interactions, it's making them more withdrawn.
Yeah, fair enough. I think those are all really valid points. And I think it's also interesting that a lot of the factors are around that we've mentioned are physical factors, right? Like moving, our body's not exercising, not getting enough sunlight. But then there's this aspect of what about the non-physical things, like the emotional aspects that might be draining us. So I think part of the reason why the world in general is experiencing less motivation and a lot less energy is because of our nervous system. So you guys all probably know this, but we have a nervous system that responds to stress. So we have our fight or flight mode, and that's meant to protect us when there's a real threat or danger that's coming towards us. And coronavirus is a real threat, right? Like we are worried about ourselves getting it. We're worried about vulnerable loved ones getting it. We know people who have gotten it. We know people who have passed away from it. So it's a real threat that's looming, but there's also no cure, and there isn't a whole lot that we can do. So what happens is that when our bodies experience a stress that we are not able to run away from, that we're not able to fight, our bodies actually go into another mode, which is a third mode called freeze. And when we go into freeze, that's when we experience being lethargic, feeling tired, feeling less motivated. And doing things during that time period is a lot harder. And I kind of think of it as like trying to either run in a swimming pool or run on the beach in sand, right? Like those are tasks that are much easier to do on land and much more difficult when we're trying to do it in other elements. So in the same way, I think the world's kind of experiencing a lot more stress right now. Whether or not we personally feel like we're more stressed, I think we take on the stress that's happening. And that's part of why I think we're a lot more tired than we normally are, even though we're not doing as much. So with all that being said, I think the second reason is that I think COVID is bringing up a lot of stuff for people. It's like this flashlight that is shining a light into just things that we might normally not look at in our lives because we try to keep busy and not think about things. So a lot of my clients, the hardest times for them is at nighttime, when things are still, when things are quiet, when they're alone with their thoughts. Those are the most difficult times because we try to drown out a lot of things that are going on inside with distractions. And now with us staying home, with us, just not moving as much and not having as much to do, I think it's bringing up a lot of stuff for people where they're starting to kind of look at things that they might not have looked at before. So in saying all of that, I think that the world is needing rest more than ever right now. And specifically, if we circle back to Nicodemus, the kind of rest that the world is needing is much more than physical rest. I think it's more than us just taking a nap. I think it's more than us just sleeping or not moving. I think that the world is looking for rest emotionally. So now I want you to put your thinking caps on and just consider for a moment, what are some things that we need to rest from emotionally? What do you think?
The news.
The news. Yeah, what do you think? What do you think if we rest from the news, what kind of emotional rest will it give us, Oscar?
Well, I mean, most of the news are bad, and some things that and there are some things that you cannot do anything about it. Like so I feel, at least for me, I try, I just turn on the news to see, okay, they changed the policy in Austin, okay, good. Otherwise, like, I don't want to keep reading other things that I cannot do anything. Like, yeah.
Going off of news, I would think that you'd be more worried.
Mm,
So the news brings worry.
yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe we need some rest from worry. What other things do you think that we need to rest from emotionally?
I think it might be in terms of, well, okay, since you're not going to be seeing people all the time, so I'm not sure what type of emotion that plays into, but yeah, understanding that sometimes you might not be able to see everyone face to face.
Mm. Yeah, like isolation. Okay. What other things do you think we need to rest from?
I think sadness, because some of us have like experienced or have friends who have lost loved ones, or we hear about it, just people we haven't even met, they've passed away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What else?
Well, something also that I feel people can well, or it could be good to rest is from this feeling of overwhelming, because if people is not being very productive, their work just like kind of stuck. So they have more work to do, but then at the same time, it's like a circle, like a loop, because they have more work to do, then they get more stress, and then they become less productive. But then they need to accomplish more. So
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, especially for students. Well, I guess working people too, but so often, so much of a student's worth is found in productivity, right? Anything else that you think we need to rest emotionally from?
I think there's a kind of a bigger world picture that we all kind of wonder right now. We don't know, but there's a stress of like, I don't think we've ever been in a place where the whole world is being held captive. And we don't know when we're going to get out of it. We don't know how we're going to get out of it. We don't know what life is going to look like on the other side of it. We don't know. I mean, maybe we even wonder, we have thoughts in the background of like, so this may not be the end of the world, but is this like a bit of an insight as to what, the apocalypse is going to look like? Does this bring up, thoughts of the book of Revelation for us? I mean, I'm not sure how much but I think that's there.
In the back.
There. I think it's there. Yeah.
Yeah, rubbing in the background, sure.
About this too, like for me makes so much sense what he just said. Sometimes I feel me like thinking this so too much in the apocalypse, and like these things, if I am ready, and if this is really the time that the things beginning, and I get so anxious that I have been feeling not so good about this. I know that like for me don't get like this, I need to be really in connection with God, but has been a tough time because of that, to think this too much, like listen so much people talking about this too, and sometimes I get really anxious now.
Yeah, and I think you're not alone, Rebecca, in that. I think there's so much anxiety that's happening in the world right now. speaking to other therapists, we always talk about what is like the number one thing that's coming up for people right now. And by far, it is anxiety. There's so much unknown, like what Ron was saying, so much unknown in terms of what is going to happen, how long, when, where. Yeah, and it brings up anxiety for a lot of us.
I don't know how to really word it, but it's kind of like, like when you're like just in an uncomfortable situation or things are bringing you down, but you're forcibly trying so hard to kind of like move past that, where it almost becomes counterintuitive to accepting the reality. I think one of the things that we may need to have some emotional rest from is just kind of like acknowledging the reality of the situation. I feel like we're all like, oh yeah, don't worry, coronavirus is gonna be gone soon in May, blah blah blah. Like we're like, I get it. I'm an optimist at heart. But I think there's also like a point where there's a threshold where you're just kind of like suppressing the reality, and like it's almost, like I said, counterintuitive to being able to actually help yourself, where it's like kind of like that whole song about like what if there's blessings in tears or whatever, like just being able to acknowledge the reality of it and letting that be a rest in itself, even though it almost has some negative connotation to it, but it's just allowing yourself to accept the negative a little bit, or realizing the situation, because I feel like a lot of us are kind of like just expecting that things will get better, but we don't know yet either, so that in itself could be stressing us out too.
So maybe a little bit of denial of the reality of the situation. Sure. Any other thoughts?
I have one. I think a lot of the anxiety that we're feeling is really because our days used to be so certain. We've never really lived in a time, like as a people, where your entire room is air conditioned or like heated or cooled to the specificity that you want. And what is today? Today's Tuesday. I'm going to drive into work and I'm going to work on like those 3 things that I have to work on. Like everything is so certain. And then with this COVID thing, it's just like, I don't know if my next interaction is going to be the thing that kills me.
Right.
It's like, I don't know if this business is going to be open anymore because of what's happening. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Is the sun still going to rise?
Right.
It's just all that uncertainty. And I don't know. I think even maybe we do need something like that every once in a while, just so that we recognize that there's so much more beyond what we have. There's so many more things to consider.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying in that is like when our days are more structured and things are quote unquote normal, we have like this garb of control and certainty where we think, I know exactly what's going to happen, when in reality we don't, right? But we at least we have some semblance of it. And I think this is interesting because we're talking about like a deep level of emotional angst, right? That no amount of just simply sleep or sunshine or movement is going to remedy. This is like, so there's so many layers to that it's more than just trying to fix it with physical things. And I want to point out one of my favorite Bible verses in Matthew. It's in chapter 11. And it's titled like Jesus Gives True Rest. Because I think like the Bible is so clear over and over that it is so much more than just about the physical. It's about the emotional and it's about the spiritual. Let's read Matthew 11 verses 28 and 29. Well, 28 to 30. And I want you to read it from this perspective of more than just physical. Think about spiritual and emotional as you read it. So it says, Matthew 11, 28 to 30. Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. What do you notice in this in these 3 verses? What stands out to you?
So I think it's contradictory because it's saying, if you want to have rest, take my yoke.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very heavy thing.
Yeah, so it really sounds contradictory, right? Like, I thought you want me to rest. Why do I have to take a yoke? Any other thoughts? What do you notice in these 3 verses? I think you're muted, Natasha.
Okay, I want to say that in the verse 29, it also describes how is Jesus, and it say that he's gentle and lovely in heart,
Mm.
and oh, that's good.
Mm-hmm.
When you say not look at the physical, you're also looking at the yoke as something you physically or tangibly have to touch. We've heard about yoke also when it relates to marriage, being equally yoked. We're talking about we're Christians, we're Christ-like. So we're taking on his personalities, we're taking on his love, his grace. We're learning from him, and we're trying to emulate being like him in our life. So if he's saying take up his yoke, learn from him. Learn from how he dealt with life when he was fit in his physical state as a human being down here. We are dealing with what I call low-key Paul life right now. You know, we're going through some stuff, and some of us, we've had the bottom taken out from us. We're not working, we can't socialize, we can't congregate, we can't fellowship, the list goes on about all the can'ts. But isn't this where we now implement that faith? Yet we push through all those things that we hear from Ron and, you know, all of our campus pastors and chaplains, and all these conferences we go through, and all these sermons we hear, and all these Sabbath school lessons we go through and we're learning from, and all these Bible texts we memorize. This is the time we use it to push through all of the anxiety, all of the stress. You're talking to somebody who, you know, battled with depression for years, and so I'm not talking out of, you know, non-experience, but it's pushing through. It's saying those verses even if right now I don't feel it, but my faith is in God, because fear is from me, fear is not of God, faith is of God. So if I take that time now to remember those Bible texts and remember those, you know, encouraging words. Not all the time is it, you know, biblical, but encouraging words. This is the time we stand on our faith. This is the time we say, okay, I'm going to push through. Today, I don't feel like it. Today, I'm angry because I've been locked up in the house for some people are marking off on the calendar, day 35. You know, I want to get out, but, you know, following the rules and being obedient, I'll keep safe, I'll keep healthy, I'll keep this. So we push through. God, I trust you past what I see. God, I trust you right now. I'm in the middle of a panic attack, God, and I need you right now. This is the time we call on God and we act like David, where we encourage ourselves.
Yeah, and I think the key thing that you're saying in this, Natasha, is encouragement. I see this verse that is written out here as encouragement, because what we see here, what I find super fascinating, is that the encouragement that Jesus gives is that he is gentle and lowly in heart. If we were just needing physical rest, wouldn't he just say, like, well, I'm going to be really quiet while you nap? I'm going to be like really still while you know, like, I'm not going to tell you to do anything. No, he's specifically pointing out that he is gentle and lowly in heart. And then to go further, he connects it to so that you will find rest for your souls. He doesn't say that you'll find rest for your body. It's like this souls, like as in more encompassing, like all of you, like your spiritual well-being, your emotional well-being, your physical well-being, that all of you will find rest. And I think that that's really powerful, because he's promising something far more complete, right? He's promising a rest that is going to rejuvenate us in all domains. Mm-hmm. So I was going to share just really quickly just some of the things that I think students and us as human beings, regardless of COVID or not, need to rest from. I'm going to share my screen just because it's easier for you guys to see it. I shared this on Instagram the other day because I just think it makes a lot of sense. I think there's things that we need to rest from, like others' expectations of us. That can become a really big pressure. Pretending to be okay, holding it together, being perfect, proving our worth. That's a big one, especially for students. Productivity, people pleasing, arguing, looking good on social media, judgment or criticism from other people, being a yes person, not being able to say no, overanalyzing, worry, blame, multitasking, approval seeking, just those kinds of things. I think those are things that are like little holes in a balloon. They pin us and they just take energy from us little by little, so much so that we just end up being deflated and not having energy at all. So with that in mind, I want us to look at 3 ways that I think that God actually gives us rest, and he provides rest for us. So,
just really quick before you, because I want you to go into that, but I do also think that there's confusion a lot of times about this verse, because I think we think of a yoke like a oxen yoke, but probably what Jesus was talking about was something that was very common in his day for a rabbi. Mm-hmm. If you came under a rabbi, you came under their yoke. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of like it was something that probably was picked up, by the yoke of oxen, but that's not what that's not what they were. That's not what it meant. It meant you come under their teaching. So to come under the yoke of Jesus meant to come under his teaching, and his teaching was, "I'm lowly and humble of heart, and you'll find rest here." Other rabbis, you're not going to find that, but under me, you're going to find rest. So I thought that might be helpful.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense.
Also wish to add on to that. I think that the come to me aspect, like we need to take initiative in that we need to give up whatever it is that is weighing us down. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, makes sense. Anybody else want to add anything?
I didn't mean to interrupt you. I want you to go ahead.
No, all good, Ron.
That might be helpful.
Always free to interrupt me, Ron. Okay, 3 ways that I think that we can find rest emotionally. We're gonna just breeze through this pretty quickly because we got to move on. But let's go to Exodus 20. You guys are, I'm sure, familiar what we can find in Exodus 20. Exodus 20, verses 9 to 11, or 8 to 11. It says, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it." So often I think when we consider the Sabbath, we think, oh, physical rest. Like we always think, yes, the Sabbath is a day where I don't do work, which is very true. But I think that there's another part to the Sabbath that if we only see it as physical rest, we miss out in the fullness of the Sabbath. And that is found in verse 11, where God is very particular in saying this. He says, in 6 days, the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. It's kind of like this like underline or this punctuation where he's saying, I am the one who created it. And it reminds us of who we are, that we are created in his image. So in the Sabbath, it's a constant reminder of whose we are, which means that we don't have to work for our worth, that our worth is not in our GPA, it's not in our productivity, it's not in anything that we've done. Our worth is in us being made in the image of God, which I think is so important for us to fully embrace in order to truly appreciate the Sabbath. That it's not just, okay, the Sabbath is a day where I don't have to go to work. No, the Sabbath is much more than that. It is a day where I am reminded of who has made me and my value in that. So there's that. The second thing is, let us go to John 6:37. This is another one of my favorite verses. So I think one way that we can rest emotionally is through the Sabbath. The second way is John 6:37. All that the Father gives me will come to me, and the one who comes to me I will by no means cast out. This is one of the most comforting Bible passages to me, because Jesus is literally saying to us, anybody who comes to me, I will not cast you out. Like, anybody who comes near me, I will not turn you away. You can come with full confidence that you will not be rejected. And I think in that is this promise of rest in his salvation, that we don't have to be worried or anxious about our future, in the sense of God's salvation is sure. It's promised for us. We can rest emotionally in that. And finally, the last thing is John 10, verse 10. And this one is a little bit, it's like mostly research-based, but I think there's a lot of evidence in the Bible to support it too. One of the key ways that psychology actually tells us that we can rest emotionally is through play. So I remember when I learned about this in grad school, I thought this was like so bizarre and weird, because I'm like, play? I'm not a kid. Why would I play? But what research is showing us is that play is so important for both adults and for children. It's such an important form of rest. And think about like any children, young children that you may know, and just observe how they play. There is a kind of freedom and like lostness that they have in it. There's no trying to be somebody they're not. They're not trying to prove themselves. They are totally at rest in their play. And there's so much depth to that we don't have time to go into, but play is such an important thing for us as human beings. And I believe that God has given us play to be able to rest emotionally. So John 10, verse 10, you guys probably all know this verse, but it says, the thief does not come except to steal and to kill and to destroy. I have come that they may have life and that they may have it more abundantly. So God is calling us to live a life full of abundance, to like live fully, not dry, not in scarcity, but with abundance. So just to recap, the three ways I think that God calls us to rest emotionally is he reminds us of a Sabbath, of the Sabbath, like a weekly reminder of rest in him and our identity being found in him, that our worth, we don't have to work for it. Our worth is not in our productivity. Our worth is not in our GPA or what we've done. Our worth is in him. So the Sabbath is a constant weekly reminder of that. And then he reminds us of our rest in his salvation, that he gives us salvation. He will never turn us away from him. Anybody who comes to him will have salvation. So there's that. And then the third one is he invites us to live abundantly and fully. He invites us to lean into that we're not to be, these boring, dry Christians who have no life, But instead, he says, no, I want you to have abundance. I want you to have fullness of joy. So I think those are the three ways that in like very concrete ways, God calls us to rest, and more than just rest physically, but rest emotionally. And I think it's even more important during this time because there's so much upheaval in our lives and so much emotional unrest. Yeah, so that's kind of all I had for you guys today. I think what we're going to be doing now is we're going to be breaking up into groups where you can discuss this a little bit more. I don't know if the team has like questions or things that you guys wanted them to discuss, or you're just asked to like respond in general and talk about it.
Yeah, so if you guys can just, we'll put you in maybe groups of 4-ish, around 4 people. And if you guys can just debrief about what you learned. We'll send out prompt questions to help you if you're at a loss of things to talk about. So yeah, let me just create the rooms. All right. Okay,